What's up, guys? All right, let's talk about escrows and due diligence. So first of all, what happens before we even get to an escrow, and what happens when we're in an escrow? If you're investing with us, how soon will we need your cash? How fast can we close the deal? Let's talk about a couple of these things. So first of all, in our business, when we find a deal and we start going through the financials and working things out before we make an offer, that's called underwriting. Now, oftentimes we'll do what's called napkin underwriting, which is really a way to say running some rough numbers before we get too far into the weeds. I'm in charge of acquisitions, by the way, for the company, and so a lot of times what I'll do, I'll look at tons of deals online. I'll weed stuff out based on what I know we're not interested in. Now, when we find something that starts looking interesting, I'll do the napkin underwriting. So that basically means running some quick math, looking at what the income is, what the expense is, kind of getting a general feel for, does this deal make sense? Are they asking too much per door? Is the cap rate too low? Doing that smell test. Now, once something passes the smell test, oftentimes we'll then drive up, we'll see it, we'll start doing real underwriting. So the real underwriting is when we'll put the deal into an Excel model and we'll really start taking the income, the expenses, and playing the deal out financially on paper. Now, if all of that works, we'll get to a point where we make an offer. So an offer could be an LOI or it could be an actual purchase agreement. Just oftentimes depends. If our offer gets accepted, and when our offer gets accepted, and when that happens, which is amazing, we move into opening the escrow. Pretty straightforward, open the escrow, give the deposit, and that's when everything becomes super real. So, and actually that's also what I would like to say, that's when the fun starts. So as soon as we open an escrow, we go into full DD mode, or due diligence. And what that means, especially here at BCGK, we'll all get together, we'll put our master list together, and we'll go, okay guys, we've got a month to do our inspections before our deposit's going to go hard. We've got to work on our loan. We've got to get an appraisal. We've got to raise money, right? So we'll sit down and we'll kind of go over all these things. And usually what we're seeing nowadays is that the listing brokers and the sellers, they want to do a 60 to 90 day escrow. So if we sign up tomorrow to buy a property, we've got 60 to 90 days to do all of our inspections, make sure the deal pencils, and raise all of our capital. So you might be asking yourself, okay, what goes into the due diligence, or what does BCGK do to make sure the deal is really a fantastic deal? So I'll go through a couple of things I got on my list. So number one, inspections. Now, when you buy a house, guy goes through, checks the appliances, checks the plumbing, checks the roof, whatever, right? Now, we do the same thing with the apartments, but if we're buying, for example, a 48-unit apartment complex, he's got to go through 48 kitchens. Maybe if there's 2 bathrooms in each unit, he's got to go through, almost 100 bathrooms. And so it's pretty extensive. In addition, because we're buying expensive and large properties, we'll add in things like pool inspection if it's got a pool, plumbers, we'll get roofers out there. I mean, actually, this last escrow that we were getting ready to tee up, we were looking at a list like this big of a ton of inspections that we were going to have to do. And by the way, that's part of what we do as the sponsor. We use our own money to fund those things up front when we go into the deal. But it's well worth it, because if you're doing this yourself or you're investing with somebody that doesn't do all those inspections, I would be a little leery, because if you're spending $8 million, $5 million, $3 million, $15 million, you want to make sure you're buying the right asset. So we'll line up all of our inspections. The next thing we'll do is leases. So I've got on here audit leases. So what that basically means is you'll request a copy from the seller of all of their lease documents, and you'll go through them and you'll say, okay, you'll start making basically almost like in the movies or the shows when they're doing the board about the serial killer and they're profiling everybody and they got all the stuff, the arrows going. I mean, you kind of do the same thing with the leases, right? Because you're looking to see, okay, who has pets? By the way, who's paying for pet rent? Who's paying for parking right now? Has anybody been late or missed payments? You're looking just for anything you can find in the leases. Who's moved in recently? Who's been there for 10 years? Who's at market rent? Who's not at market rent? So auditing leases, by the way, it's very arduous, takes a lot of time, but you gotta do it. Now, number 3, next thing we do, audit financials. Similar to leases, we'll ask that the seller give us all of their numbers. So for the last couple years that they've owned it, we'll ask them to give us all their rent receipts, all their expenses, what do they paid the plumbers, what do they paid landscapers, what do they paid for pool maintenance. And what we're trying to do in doing all that, we're basically going back to, and I'll just draw all over this thing, we're going back to underwriting. Because again, remember, up front, we're underwriting based on what we think the property will do, and then we're going into escrow on those assumptions. But once we're in escrow, our job is to really check to see, okay, were those assumptions correct? Was there something the seller was hiding from us? Were there numbers that were off? And so when we get into all the weeds, we're re-underwriting the deal as we go. So number 4 on my list, interview project or property managers. So this is a big one. When you buy a property, and we've touched on this in some of our other videos, you've got to have the right management company. Now, oftentimes, there's already a manager in place. But if that property is a big value add and for some reason it hasn't been being run efficiently, there's a chance that we won't want to keep that manager in place. So at BCGK, we'll usually give that person a chance. We'll interview them, but we'll definitely interview 2, 3, 4, 5 other managers in the area that are local, that have experience with a deal that size, and that can really help us, by the way, in escrow to do more due diligence. So we'll go to a property manager and say, hey, we think these properties should rent for $1,600 each unit. Are we full of it? And they might say, hey, that's great. We think you can get $1,800. Or no, you're never going to get $1,500, and here's why. So we'll really utilize that as something that will happen during the escrow to, again, reinforce our underwriting. Number 5, now we're going to get bids. So when we do all of our inspections and we start going through the units, we're going to have our GC come up. And we've got a couple we work with, one primarily that's kind of our go-to guy, but we'll have him come up, or one of them come up, and they'll start going through the units, looking at kitchens, looking at bathrooms. If the roof inspection came back that something's got to happen. So we'll start putting together a full-fledged budget in escrow to understand, okay, when we buy this property, is there $300,000 of work? Is there $1 million of work? How soon do those things have to happen? We'll also have to start forecasting vacancies, because in California, it's different than, say, Texas or Florida. If you go buy something in Texas, the way I understand it, you can pretty much, if everybody's there in place, you can pretty much ask people to move out as long as they're month to month. You can ask them to move out in 30 or 60 days, and you can get the whole place vacant and remodel everything at once. Well, in California, they don't let you do that. So if a tenant's been there longer than a year, you really can't ask them to leave unless they've not been paying rent or done something to warrant that. So the point is, we have to make assumptions. We have to say, okay, if there's 48 units, maybe we think the first year we're going to get 5 vacant. Maybe the second year we think we're going to get maybe 10 vacant. So we have to kind of forecast out that budget based on what we're getting from the general contractor. So then we move on to re-underwriting, which I've sort of touched on. Always going to be re-underwriting during the deal. And ultimately we get to a point of, it's sort of like the shit or get off the pot. I'm just going to say it, right? It's like okay, here we go. We've done our due diligence. We've done our underwriting. We have all of our inspections. And let's say we're in escrow on a deal at $8 million. And we're going to come back to the seller. And we found a whole bunch of things we weren't happy with. There's a bunch of extra work. We found some inconsistencies in the leases. And we're going to come back and say, hey, we would like a $400,000 price reduction or a $300,000 credit, or we'll buy it, but you got to put the new roof on. So this becomes the second round of negotiation. And it's really what makes or breaks the deal, because oftentimes if a deal is going to fall out, it happens during this point right here. So anyway, all that being said, if we make it past that and everything else is good, then we move forward and we close the deal. But as you can see, there's a lot that goes into an escrow, both up front before it's in escrow and definitely during. And we do all of this at BCGK to make sure that when at day 60 or 90 we ask your money to come in and we close the deal, we know for sure we've done our due diligence. There we go.